suspects are being. One case involves the FBI is now offering $100,000 to see if the police are releasing.
Welcome to Misty Mysteries, a true crime and paranormal podcast. For the true crime fact this week, we're talking about death row last meals. The last meal is actually a tradition, and it's not a rule. It is an offer for those about to be executed. It was first introduced in the United States by Texas in 1924 when they switched from the gallows to electric chair. Texas no longer offers the last meal to inmates on death row, but the states that still do have death penalties and offer last meals each have their own budgets. Florida is the most generous with $40 and Oklahoma with the lowest at $15. This week I'm going to be talking about a 40-year-old case of a California woman who was stalked by an unknown man who took her from her family and her life. Have you heard of Anchor? Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. When I started Misty Mysteries, I didn't know where to go, and Anchor helped me get Misty Mysteries started without charging me an arm and a leg. Anchor is really my suggestion for anyone looking to start a podcast. It has tools that allow you to record and edit in-app or on the website. Anchor distributes your podcasts on all the listening places such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, and all your favorite listening places. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, it's totally free, all on Anchor FM and on the Anchor app. Dorothy Jane Scott was born April 23, 1948, to parents Jacob and Vera Scott in Anaheim, California. Dorothy is described as a very giving and caring person and committed to her Christian faith. In 1976, when she was 28 years old, Dorothy had a son who she named Sean. Dorothy was raising Sean all on her own. Sean's father lived in Missouri. She was described as a very loving and great mother to Sean. All her free time outside of work, Dorothy would spend with him, and she didn't go out with friends or show interest in dates. Dorothy and Sean lived with her aunt in Stanton, California, but she worked in Anaheim, California at a John Head Shop and Swingers Sight Club as a secretary for the stores. A head shop is a 1960 dispensary and smoke shop put together. They sold cannabis-related items such as bongs, shirts, blankets, and it was also a place where people could listen to music, hang out with friends. These shops were legal by marketing all their items for tobacco use only, which, since becoming legal in California, has changed. A swinger shop sold items such as lava lamps, incense, crystals, and beads. Her coworkers at the shop would describe her as dependable and organized. Dorothy didn't smoke or drink, but her father, Jacob Scott, was co-owner of the shops. In the early months of 1980, when she was 32, Dorothy started to receive phone calls from a man. This man would call her every day, and she said she recognized his voice but couldn't figure out who he was. The man would call her at home and at work. His calls varied from telling her he loved her, gushing about her, and even threatening her. One day even telling her that he was going to get her, and when he did, he was going to cut her into pieces so no one could find her. To scare her even more, he would describe to her how she looked that day in her outfit and how much he liked her outfit. One day, while at work, her stalker called her and told Dorothy to go to her car. When she got to her car, he had left her dead rose on her windshield. So terrified of this stalker, she decided to take up self-defense classes. She even brought up to coworkers and family about getting a gun, even though she was very against guns. But she never got a gun, concerned her 4-year-old Sean would find it and hurt himself. Dorothy had told friends, coworkers, and family about the calls and the stalker, but I couldn't find any reports or records of her reporting the activity to police. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy had a work meeting she needed to attend at 9 p.m., so she dropped Sean off at her parents' house in Anaheim on her way to work. During this meeting, she noticed one of her coworkers, Conrad Bostro, wasn't feeling good. He had red spots on his arm and a rash growing. He was sweaty and seemed dizzy. Being concerned for him, Dorothy and another coworker, Pamela Head, offered to take Conrad to the hospital. Since they didn't have cell phones, first thing she needed to do was stop at her parents' house to let them know where she was going and that she would be back for Sean later that night. She also changed her scarf she was wearing from a black one to a red one. Dorothy then drove Pam and Conrad to the UC Irvine Medical Center. Dorothy and Pam waited in the waiting room of the emergency room while Conrad got treated for a black widow bite. Around 11 p.m., Conrad came out, and all he needed to do was pick up a prescription from the hospital pharmacy. Pam stayed with Conrad while Dorothy went to go to the bathroom and get the car and pull it up to the curb, since Conrad was still pretty dizzy. Pam and Conrad waited on Dorothy for 20 minutes before they saw her 1973 white Toyota station wagon driving towards them with its headlights on high beam, blinding them. They were waving and shouting to what they thought was her driving the car, but they weren't sure because they couldn't see, and the person just drove past them. The car then turned right out of the parking lot, and they assumed Dorothy had an accident with Sean. Pam and Conrad waited 2 hours till they called Dorothy's parents to see if she was okay, but her parents hadn't seen her yet. Her parents and her coworkers called the police, but they told them she went on a date and just wanted to leave them. At 4:30 a.m. on May 29, 1980, 5 hours after Dorothy went missing, her 1973 white Toyota station wagon was found on fire in Santa Ana, California, in an alley. All of Dorothy's personal items were in the car, but she was nowhere to be found, even with searches of the area conducted. This is when police got concerned for Dorothy. The stalker didn't stop once Dorothy disappeared. He went on to terrorize her family. Weeks after her disappearance, a call was made to Jacob and Vera's home shortly after Jacob left for work and Vera was home alone. When Vera picked up the phone, a man asked her, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" Vera then told him, yes. He then told her, "I've got her," and hung up the phone. The phone call to Vera was the police's first real clue to finding Dorothy, but ultimately nothing came of it. The police told Jacob and Vera after this call to keep her disappearance out of the media and to keep it quiet to help their investigation. The stalker started to call the family every week. He would wait till Vera was home alone and call her every week on Wednesday. He would tell Vera about how he killed Dorothy and he was keeping her and torturing her. Police tried to trace the call, but he never stayed on long enough for it to be picked up, and with no one recognizing his voice, the police weren't any closer to finding Dorothy. Jacob was tired of staying quiet, and he went to the Orange County Registry paper about Dorothy's disappearance. The paper ran a report on her and the circumstances around her disappearance. The stalker, keeping an eye on her family and her case, called Pat Riley, an employee at the paper. He told Pam, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." He also told Pat about details not released to the public, such as Conrad's spider bite, and that she had been wearing a red scarf. The only people who knew she changed her scarf and what she was wearing were Conrad, Pam, Jacob, and Vera. The stalker's call to Pat baffled her friends and family. Dorothy had never mentioned a boyfriend, yet even had time for one. Anytime she went to work or the one time a month she went out, she left Sean at her parents' house. Once a month didn't seem like enough time to sustain a relationship in her friends' and family's eyes. They felt whoever did this imagined a life with Dorothy he hadn't had. 4 years went by after this call to Pat with Dorothy missing and the man who stalked and kidnapped her calling Vera every Wednesday. Police never being able to trace the calls. One day, the man called while Jacob was at home. He answered the phone and the caller just hung up. The calls from the stalker just stopped after this for a while, till the stalker randomly started to call again. On August 6, 1984, at a construction site in Santa Ana Canyon, a construction worker dug up human and dog bones. A week after the bones are dug up, dental records matched the bones to Dorothy Jane Scott, along with a turquoise ring, a wristwatch that her family identified as hers. Due to the decay on her body and how much of her was found, a cause of death couldn't be found. A time of death was named by her watch they found that stopped at 12:29 a.m. May 29, 1980. 4 years after Dorothy's disappearance, she was laid to rest on August 22, 1984. Her family felt sadness that she was gone, but relief to bring her home. Dorothy's stalker and killer did not stop after her body was found. He made one more call to Dorothy's family, asking Vera, "Is Dorothy home?" Dorothy's case, now a homicide case, police first looked at Sean's father, Dennis Terry, but he had alibis, putting him at home in Missouri during this time of Dorothy's disappearance and death. It is believed that Dorothy's stalker and killer may have been a frequent customer at the shop she worked at. She worked in the back of the store and didn't interact with customers, but if she left out the back for air or sunshine during the day, the person may have seen her. She did say she knew the person's voice, but couldn't figure out who they were. Maybe the reason the stalker never talked to her father is because he knew he would know his voice. Dorothy's son, Sean, has never officially come out and talked about his mother's case, but a blogger by the name of Crime Blogger 1983 has written an article about a suspect the blogger reported Sean told them about. The suspect, Mike Butler, who lived in the mountains nearby, was reportedly obsessed with Dorothy and reportedly into occult activity. Her sister was a local musical artist to the area that worked at the same shop Dorothy did. The disappearance and death of Dorothy Jane Scott is still unsolved 40 years later. Dorothy's parents, Jacob and Vera, both passed away, still fighting for justice for their daughter. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Misty Mysteries. If you like the podcast, please share it with friends and family on social media. Speaking of social media, you can find the podcast on places like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Please leave a good review for the podcast on places like Apple Podcasts and Podchasers. You can find the podcast on a site called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can help support the podcast to bring you special episodes and merchandise, and you can also get your name shouted out on the podcast. With a membership, you can get your name shouted out and so much more. You can find the podcast on listening places such as Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and so many more. As always, my sources can be found in the episode description, and I'll see you on Sunday.